All right, it's almost midnight at my house and I have a couple of people sleeping upstairs. I turned off the fan to make it as quiet as I can down here, but I'm going to try to keep my voice low. And on top of that, I'm going to take advantage of the fact that for this particular lecture, and a few others to come actually, I've recorded bits of them in audio files that are embedded in the lecture. So a lot of times you may not see my lips moving because it'll be old Brett from a few months ago talking, not today's Brett talking. So in the era of COVID, I want to make a couple of quick announcements about that before we continue with the lecture on consciousness. And those announcements are, first of all, you might want to take a look at the executive summary that I will post sometime early tomorrow morning, probably. That's a two-page summary of this entire lecture. There's also Module 17, which I can tell some of you have probably already read, but the executive summary is super brief, follows this lecture very closely. I should also mention, as I mentioned before, that there are embedded audio files in this lecture, and they're a bit quieter than my normal voice, and I'll probably click on them on most of the slides. All right, let's move to the first part of the lecture on consciousness then. And I'd like to begin with a couple of hands-on activities. After giving you this basic definition of consciousness, consciousness is our personal experience of the world, including our thoughts and our feelings. So if you're aware of having an itchy knee, if you have a mosquito bite or you think it's a mosquito bite in your knee, that's a part of your conscious experience. If you're getting sleepy, and I hope to be sleeping pretty soon, not immediately, I hope I don't fall asleep during this lecture. If I do, that's an altered state of consciousness that makes it hard for me to get things done. Okay, so that's consciousness and covers a wide range of things. Let's see what a slightly younger version of myself, just a few months younger, had to say back in March. All right. One way to explore the topic of consciousness in a very hands-on way is to try to take conscious control over something that is normally regulated, normally controlled by unconscious, or at least mostly unconscious processes. So as soon as you finish listening to this little audio clip, I would like you to try to hold your breath for exactly 45 seconds. To make it easy on you, I've placed a red bar to the left of this slide. And once you've finished listening to this audio file, you should simply have to click one more time, and you should see that red bar begin to appear and work its way from the lower part of the screen to the top of the C where it says consciousness. And if you want, you can wait and click until you see the red bar start to appear, then take a deep breath and see if you can hold it for, let's say, 43 seconds instead of 45 seconds. Please do that now. Now you can't do that because you don't have the PowerPoint, but I'll do it for you. So I'm gonna click a couple times to get things going. A red bar is going to appear over here. It's a long red bar. It stops right about right there at the top of that capital C. That's going to tell you what 45 seconds is, so you don't have to use any kind of timing device. I'm going to wait till I see the red bar start. I'm going to take a deep breath and see if I can hold my breath for like 43 seconds. All right, here we go. When you see the red bar appear, take a deep breath and hold your breath. Okay. Okay, I did it. I don't know if you did it. I tried to wait a second or two until the bar was done. Normally, it's a bit more difficult for me to hold my breath for 45 seconds than it was tonight. Maybe I'm a bit more relaxed than usual, but I definitely can't hold my breath as long now as I could when I was younger. And even holding my breath for 45 seconds, In some classes, I do this for a minute, by the way, so you're the lucky group. By the 45-second mark or so, my brain starts saying, dude, it's time to breathe, whether you want to or not. So let's see what I can add about that. If you tried to hold your breath for 45 seconds, or if you tried to hold your breath for as long as possible, you probably reached a certain point when it became very difficult to do that. And at some point, even if you're a freshwater pearl diver who can hold your breath for several minutes, you'll reach a point at which your brain, the lower areas of your brain, areas of your hindbrain, for example, absolutely insist that you breathe. So you can form the conscious intention to hold your breath, and you can hold your breath for a while, but at a certain point, an evolutionarily ancient area of your brain, the part of your brain that regulates your breathing, will absolutely insist that you breathe. And so that's an example of the fact that we can have conscious intentions or goals, but at some level, unconscious, instinctive aspects of brain functioning can override those conscious functions. Another way to get a sense of how consciousness works is to try to focus your conscious mind on one particular thing. I'm going to make this easier for you than it might otherwise be. I'm going to ask you to try to think of nothing but Idris Elba, the actor you see portrayed in these two photos. I'm going to ask you to think of nothing but Idris Elba for 45 seconds. And to make it as easy as possible for you, I've placed a timer bar to the left of the photo on the left. And after you listen to this audio file, you can click the screen one more time and you'll see a red bar progress from the lower part of the left-hand picture to the top part. When it gets to the top, that means it's been 45 seconds. So as soon as you click the red bar and you see it appear, your job is to think of nothing, absolutely nothing else but Idris Elba for 45 seconds. If you catch yourself thinking about the red bar, or you catch yourself thinking about Thor, who was in a movie once or twice with Idris Elba, that would be an intrusion. So your job, again, is to think of absolutely nothing but Idris Elba for 45 seconds. Whenever you're ready, click until you see the red bar start to move. All right, again, you can't click because you don't have the original PowerPoint, but I'll click for you. Your simple job for 45 seconds, same red bar you saw before, is to think of nothing but Idris Elba for 45 seconds with the added benefit that he's right there. You're going to be thinking about that guy. If I didn't give you his picture, it might be even more difficult, but think about Idris Elba if you can for nothing but 45 seconds. On your mark, get set, and go. Another way to get a sense of how consciousness works is to try to focus your conscious mind on one particular. All right, sorry for that little glitch. Let's see if I can back this up. And I'm going to make this easier for you. I don't want to hear. I don't want to hear myself. I'm going to ask you to try to think. I need to be quiet. Idris Elba, the actor. All right, that's a repeat. So again, my apologies. I'm not going to back this all the way up, but I'm going to try to click the bar for you without speaking at all, and see if you can think of Idris Elba, nothing but Idris Elba, for 45 seconds. Let me see if I can make that happen this time. There you go. All right, that's 45 seconds. I'll be surprised if anybody was able to think of nothing but Idris for 45 seconds because there are other things you think of. So I was trying pretty unsuccessfully. I was distracted by the red bar. I was distracted by the fact that I just messed things up and was speaking over the red bar. I was wondering if I was going to keep messing up like that when we get to the next slide. I was thinking about an episode of Eat Yourself Up with Jim Halpert from The Office. And so I tried to think of it, Eat Yourself the whole time, but I did a pretty bad job of it. Some of you might have been more focused. You might have been able to, but if you had to do that for an hour, nobody, I mean, maybe a Zen Buddhist who's at the seventh level of, transcendence or something, but nobody, eh, uh, practically nobody, I don't want to do any offense to people who have highly trained minds, but practically nobody can think of just one thing for an hour. Your conscious mind tends to wander, and folks like Dan Wegner have documented that in lots of clever and interesting ways. But we're going to keep moving here, I hope, and learn a little bit more about consciousness. Okay, so the big question one is how much can be in consciousness at once? Let's find out. The first theme of consciousness that I've emphasized in this lecture is the idea that consciousness is pretty wimpy. We don't have the control over it that we typically think that we do. And a pretty dramatic example of that is something called change blindness. As you can see here, it's the fact that we often overlook changes in our immediate environments. And part of that phenomenon is the idea that we think we would notice things that change when we often don't. For two excellent demonstrations of that, go to the website that I've linked here for you and check out the two women talking, followed by the door study. To make it a bit easier for you, I've shown you images in the lower left-hand portion of this slide. So you want to click on the particular videos at that link that shows the two women having a conversation. And once you're done with that one, you want to click further down on the page on the video that says the door study. But of course, I'll click that for you, but let me pause it while I pull those videos up. All right, I can't tell if my Screencast-O-Matic is working or not. I think, yes, it is. Okay, let's watch this video if we can.
This is a movie perception test. Watch this brief video of a conversation, and then I'll ask you some questions about it.
Hi, Sabina.
Hi.
It's been a long time since I've seen you.
Yeah, it's great to see you, Andrea.
So how did you get here?
I took the subway from Middleton, and it took only about half an hour.
Really? I drove from Gresham, and it took 45 minutes.
Hooray for public transportation.
So why did you call me here for this mysterious meeting?
I'm planning a surprise party for Jerome, and I need your help to keep him away from the house.
That's great. I'll do anything you need.
Good.
I hate surprise parties, but only when I'm the victim. Otherwise, they're great.
Very good.
Other than the strange dialogue about a surprise party, did you notice anything unusual? In our book, The Invisible Gorilla and Other Ways Our Intuitions Deceive Us, we discuss the illusion of memory. We think we perceive and remember more of our world than we actually do. The movie you just watched had 9 intentional editing mistakes. Did you spot any of them? Watch it again. Notice that the woman on the right, Sabrina, is wearing a scarf. In a moment, we'll have a close-up and the scarf will be gone. Notice the scarf is gone and Andrea, the woman on the left, has her arm on the table. Now it's at her chin. Scarf is back. Notice that the plates are red. Now they're white and Andrea's arm is back on the table. Now they're red and Sabrina's arm is off of the table. Notice that the food is in front of Sabrina. Now it's in front of Andrea. The cups and the spoon have also switched places, and Sabrina's arm is on the table when it wasn't before. Most people don't notice any of the changes, a phenomenon known as change blindness. But most people are confident that they would notice the changes. That is the illusion of memory. Check out our book, The Invisible Gorilla, to learn more. www.theinvisiblegorilla.com.
All right, we're recording again, and I've moved my frame a bit because I was getting some interference between the the pause button for Screencast-O-Matic, and the pause button for the video. So I think I've fixed that. Now you're going to hear about the door study, which is a even more interesting example of change blindness, because in this case, people are not watching a video. You'll be watching a video, but you'll be watching a video of people who exhibit change blindness in an actual real life situation. So let's see that, I hope.
The door study. This video shows a participant from a 1998 study by Daniel Simons and Daniel Levin. Watch what happens as the unsuspecting pedestrian provides directions. The young man on the left is one of the experimenters. He has approached the white-haired man and asked for directions. Watch closely as two people carrying a door pass between them, and the first experimenter is replaced by someone else.
A different person.
Like many of the people in this study, the pedestrian was entirely unaware that he was talking to a different person. Approximately 50% of the people approached in this study didn't notice when the person they were talking to was replaced by someone else. This study was among the first to demonstrate that change blindness can occur outside of the laboratory.
All right, so that is change blindness, and if my computer will cooperate, we're going to keep looking at that idea a bit, the idea that there's a limit to how much can be in consciousness at once, and change blindness is just one example. Another example comes from research using a dichotic listening task, and the broader category of this research or this phenomenon is more than just the dichotic listening task. It's the cocktail party phenomenon, And I don't remember if I showed it to you. I think I'll show it to you on the next slide, but you use the dichotic listening task to study the cocktail party phenomenon. If we don't have complete control over our conscious thoughts or over what we pay attention to, this suggests some pretty interesting phenomena. For more than 60 years now, we've known that people do have some ability. Of course, you already knew you have some ability to control what you pay attention to. And research using a dichotic listening task, you'll see an image of it on the next slide. Research using a dichotic listening task shows that if you play people different messages in each ear while they're wearing headphones, they have some ability to focus on one message and pretty much tune out the other message. But before we get to the next slide, let me tell you up front that we have some control, but not complete control over what we pay attention to. This is my 11-year-old nephew, Seville, by the way. At least he was 11 when I took this photograph of him. He's my model for a dichotic listening task. And notice that what's happening here is in his right ear, Seville is listening to a recording of the story of Little Red Riding Hood. In his left ear, which is the one he's supposed to pay attention to, that says attended input, he's listening to a completely different story. If we were doing this in the laboratory, you would hear a different voice in each ear to make it a little bit easier to know which message to attend to, which message to ignore. And if I wanted to be really sure that Seville was attending to the attended input ear, I would have him shadow. I would have him say exactly what he's hearing, a word or two behind the message. So once he heard someone say, "It's not clear how Carissa's big problem began," he would himself say, "It's not clear how Carissa's big problem began." He would continue to do that. And what most people report is that initially they get some interference from the ear they're supposed to ignore, but pretty quickly, most people say they can sort of tune that right ear, in this case, they can tune that ignored ear out and pay careful attention to the ear that they're supposed to listen to. Most people say they can do that. A few people have difficulty, but notice this does show that for most people, we have at least some control over what we consciously choose to attend to. Some control. Okay, how's it imperfect then? We're going to find out. And I'll let Brett tell you about that. When people are asked to pay attention to one ear while they're engaged in a dichotic listening task and they're told to ignore the other ear, most people report they can do that pretty well, and after a while the other ear seems to fade out completely. In fact, Cherry in her classic work on this topic found that you could even change what the speaker in the unattended ear, the speaker who's talking to you in the ear that you're supposed to ignore, she found that speaker could begin speaking in English and switch to German, and very few people would pick up on that because their job was to ignore that ear and to pay attention to what we're calling the attended ear. So again, it sounds so far like people are pretty good at controlling their conscious attention. What Cherry also found in her research is something called the cocktail party effect. That's the finding that things like our own names, or other very important information, by the way, grab our attention even if we're trying to ignore a message. So even though Seville might not notice it, if the person reading the story of Little Red Riding Hood begins reading it in German, he would almost always notice it if the person said Seville, or especially if they gave his complete first and last name. So that's an example of the fact that even though we have some control over what we consciously attend to, we don't have complete control. Some things demand our attention and take control of our attention, whether we like it or not. And that kind of imperfect control is reflected in the cocktail party effect because it's named after a cocktail party situation. You're in a room with a bunch of people, 15, 20, 30 people, not these days, but back when, when there was no COVID to worry about. And even though you can barely hear anything happening and you're focusing on the conversation of the one person you're trying to speak with, if someone says your name from across the room and there are 15 other conversations, that's likely to pop out at you and grab your attention. So the cocktail party effect again says we don't have complete control over what we pay attention to. Something we thought we had blocked out will demand our attention, take control of our attention, attention, not intention in a sense, because the stimulus is just that powerful and we're motivated to learn more, for example, about the self. So that's the cocktail party phenomenon or cocktail party effect. There's change blindness, which you already mentioned. There's the cocktail party effect. Both of those indicate that we have pretty limited control over what's in our conscious mind. We have some control, but it's far from perfect. Let's look at that in a little bit more detail. Okay, I like to say consciousness is wimpy in the sense that we really just can't use consciousness to control everything we might think we could control, we might like to control. Okay, let me give you a very different example of that with mental rotation and illusions of our ability to mentally rotate things. Human beings can engage in mental rotation. So if I showed you an upside down letter B, you could rotate it in your head and recognize that it's a letter B. Yeah, we can do that to some degree, but we can't do it as well. At least most people can't do it as well as they think they can. And I'm going to illustrate that for you. All right. On the next slide, you're going to see a man's face. It will spin for about 2 seconds. It'll sit stationary for about 2 more. Then the slide will advance automatically. And I want you to watch the face closely and think about whether you can completely rotate that face to get a very, very good idea what the guy looks like. All right, here we go. Okay, it advanced automatically. Wasn't sure it would. Okay, so imagine that your cousin. Imagine that your cousin has been on 49 dates with this rich, intelligent, extremely generous man. They've been dating for, let's say, a year and a half. She's 29, he's 32, so they're both ready to get married. They're at that point in their lives, but he always insists on hanging upside down when he's in your cousin's presence, and she doesn't know why. When she looks at him, something seems weird about his face, but the question is, what exactly is going on that's weird there. And to answer that perfectly, you would need to engage in mental rotation and take something upside down and completely flip it. All right. So your question is exactly like, not, he's a white dude or maybe he's Italian, but he's, definitely not Latino. He doesn't have blonde hair. He's got dark brown hair. I think he was going a little bit bald. What does he look like exactly? Some people have a vague feeling that there's something weird looking about him, but very, very few people know exactly what he will look like. And I'm going to share it with you, right? That's what he looked like. So when you turn that upside down, people don't see that grossly distorted face that they see if you rotate it for them. And unless you really had a clear image of that guy's face, your efforts at mental rotation failed you to some degree. So your ability to rotate something in your mind consciously is quite limited. It's another example of the limitations of the conscious mind. I still think she should marry him because he's a great guy. But I don't think you should judge a book by its cover, and I think beauty's only skin deep. Most college students say, no, not even if he's a billionaire, because I want to have I want to give my parents beautiful grandkids someday. So that's a personal choice. Okay, another example along these same lines, the limitations on consciousness, is the concept of mindlessness, and I'll let Brett tell you about that. Let's see. Back that up. Sorry, let me back that up just a little, and then I'll tell you about it. I mentioned this classic study by Ellen Langer and her colleagues in the executive summary, so I'm going to be a little bit brief here, but as you work your way through these 3 different conditions in her classic experiment, notice first of all we have a baseline control condition. If you walk up to a person in the library when there's a line for people waiting to make copies and you say, "Excuse me, I have 5 pages. May I use the Xerox machine?" 6 people out of 10, 60% of people give the polite response and allow you to cut. If you add the phrase, as they did in the second condition of the experiment, if you simply add, "because I'm in a rush," compliance goes way up to 94%. Almost everybody says yes now. So far in this experiment, it looks like people are actually pretty thoughtful. They're not mindless. You could say they're mindful. We see what's really happening, though, if we look at what happens in the third condition. Again, they used a random number generator. They either had the first condition, second condition, or third condition at random. And for the 1/3 of people who are randomly asked, not the simple question, not because I'm in a rush, but if the person added, "because I have to make copies," you saw compliance rates of 93%, which of course are identical statistically to the 94% who said yes if you said, "because I'm in a rush." That suggests mindlessness because you don't have to give a good reason to want to cut. You simply have to use a word like "because," which people appear to respond mindlessly to. So this study and other modern studies like it, including Brian Wansing's classic modern studies, I should say, of mindless eating, suggests that we spend a lot of our time not thinking carefully about what we're doing, but sort of mindlessly, as Langer put it, going about the business of daily life without thinking deeply, without making careful use of conscious reasoning. Right, and that was, I mentioned Wansing's modern replication. He found that if you give people who are watching a movie giant buckets of popcorn, they will pretty much eat all the popcorn, even if it's stale 5-day-old popcorn. So the popcorn doesn't have to even be delicious. He found that the bigger the bucket you put in front of people, the more they eat. And I hope people say, "Whoa, that's too much popcorn, I'm done." But especially if you're distracted watching an interesting movie, you're going to automatically, mindlessly eat a lot of popcorn. He's shown in dozens of clever ways that people engage in something called mindless eating. There has been a bit of controversy about some of his work, but the things that I'm mentioning here are things that I know have been replicated at least in some other laboratories. So that's mindless eating. And the general idea of mindlessness is that we don't think thoughtfully. Now, there are limits on this. So, for example, if you crash your parents' new car the second day they got it because they let you drive it to the store and they ask why you crashed it, you can't say, because I was thinking about elephants, or you can't say because I'm in a rut because I was in a rush, and you can't say because I had to drive the car. They're still going to be upset, especially if they think you weren't careful. But in day-to-day routine situations that aren't that costly, aren't that meaningful, you can often get a person to do something by just using the magic word because without worrying too much about what comes after it, which again suggests mindlessness. Okay. The third point I want to make here, and I have a big point to come after that'll be a separate lecture, but the third and final point for this piece of the lecture, at least, has to do with types and degrees of consciousness. Prior to 1970, almost all psychologists believed that we were the only organisms on the planet that possessed self-awareness. We were the only organisms on the planet, or so we thought 50 years ago, that were consciously aware of our own bodies, for example, that we recognized that we were in control of our bodies. And one very simple way to document that was to look at our ability to recognize ourselves in a mirror. If you put a monkey or a dog or a cat in front of a mirror, that animal will respond to the image in the mirror as if it's another organism. The animal might respond aggressively, for example, but pretty quickly, the dog or the cat or even the monkey will come to ignore the other creature in the mirror because that creature just never comes out of the mirror and doesn't make any noises and can't talk to me or can't communicate with me. So dogs, cats, and monkeys don't have the basic ability to naturally learn that their own image in a mirror represents or reflects them. What Gordon Gallup showed in 1970, and many people have replicated and extended this finding since, is that chimpanzees pretty quickly on their own, with no real need for coaching or scaffolding, can come to recognize themselves in a mirror. So you're going to see a video that illustrates the difference between a chimp and a monkey, for example. And I'll also mention, and we'll cover this later in the course, that human toddlers don't develop the ability to identify themselves in a mirror until they're about 18 to 24 months of age. So a very young toddler or an infant who's crawling simply won't recognize yet that the little dude or the little dudette in the mirror is me. Now, I should mention that in the past 5 decades, since Gordon Gallup did his classic work, we have learned that quite a few other animals, 5 animals, 10 animals, depending on who you listen to, can also pass the mirror test. So we know that orangutans can, some gorillas probably can, dolphins certainly can. A few people think Asian elephants can. And a group of researchers showed pretty recently, about 5 years ago, that even a species of bird, the European magpie, which is a very, very bright bird, can also pass the mirror test. So we can say pretty safely now that 5 to 10 other animals on the planet also pass the mirror test of self-awareness, but no other animals that have been tested so far pass the test, at least pass it in the absence of any coaching or scaffolding. That illustrates that not that many animals on the planet possess what we call basic self-awareness. All right, I'm going to make a quick pause here while I pull up that video for you because this video is pretty hard to get to load and run, but I'll do that. Okay, I should mention I've fast forwarded this video to about 1.5 minutes into it, so you don't have to watch or get to watch the introduction. The introduction is not really that relevant to our topic, so we're going to jump in here and in a couple of seconds get to the information and the demonstration of how we know that at least some other great apes can recognize themselves in a mirror. Let's get that to play. Just folks using a mirror.
Believe self-recognition is essential for our survival. We can live in large groups because we recognize similar features to our own in others. We can tell friend from foe.
All right, my apologies for that glitch. I was trying to get subtitles and the experiment did not work. Okay, self-recognition in monkeys, which does not happen, versus chimps, which does happen.
Human. Show a monkey a mirror and it thinks it's another monkey. It attacks. But how will our closer relatives, the great apes, react when faced with their own image? This 3-year-old chimpanzee has never seen a mirror before. He's not sure what to make of it. Erect fur is usually a sign of fear or anger. But his fear is soon replaced by curiosity.
When chimps see themselves in mirrors for the first time, they naturally assume it's another chimp, the way a human being who's never seen themselves before does, and begin to play with the mirror image.
Soon, this chimp will know it's looking at itself. Just like these older chimps, they know exactly what mirrors do. This chimp appears to know that that's her tongue and those are her teeth.
Chimpanzees seem to have a concept of the bodily self that allows them to look into a mirror and say, that image is equivalent to this body.
But how can we prove that humans and chimpanzees really identify the figure in the mirror as themselves? Psychologists have a well-known test for this. It's called the mark test. A researcher marks a child's cheek. The child then looks in a mirror. He moves his hand up to the mark. He recognizes himself.
I'm going to pause that there because they give another example or two of the Rouge test with other great apes, but they don't actually do it the way Gordon Gallup did it. I will tell you the way Gordon Gallup did it, which is that he put the chimps to sleep under anesthesia and painted a red circle on their forehead with odorless paint. So he was absolutely sure that they had no idea that anybody had marked him. Now with a little kid, a mother or a caregiver can often just pull them aside and quickly wipe it on or act like they're wiping their forehead, and the kid doesn't know the mark's been made until they get to the mirror. But to be absolutely sure that the chimpanzees did not feel anyone touching them, they put them to sleep, like as if for surgery, waited till they woke up, put them in front of the mirror. They'd already learned to use the mirror, and without exception, they went over and touched and rubbed and then sniffed and tried to figure out what was going on. That was to get past any critiques that we were just reading into the behavior of the chimp or imagining, because it was very obvious that they immediately directed their hand to the spot where people put the red circle, in this case, red instead of green. And so we're pretty darn sure that chimps have self-recognition. All right, I'm going to pause. I got to get back into PowerPoint mode. Okay, so we're back. Let's see if I can move to the next slide. Yes, I can. Okay, we covered that. We moved way up for some reason. Sorry about that. Let's move ahead instead of backwards. There we go. I also want to mention just briefly a little bit about consciousness versus unconsciousness in daily behavior, and then we'll take a break before we get to part 2 of the lecture. So if you recall Freud at all, or if you've learned about Freud in other contexts of your life, you know that he thought the selfish, violent id was a very powerful, unconscious, or at least mostly unconscious force, and Freud had lots of ideas about that. For better or worse, a lot of modern thinkers really treat Freud's ideas as an ancient curiosity, but some modern thinkers have recognized, and I know I've mentioned this before, that even if Freud wasn't right about the details of the unconscious, there is something called the cognitive unconscious that's been studied very carefully for about the past 30 years or so. So John Killstrom, I think, wrote a paper in 1991 to document that. And since he wrote that paper, hundreds of papers that connect to the cognitive unconscious have come out, and they've documented that there is a cognitive, not necessarily a Freudian, though Freud was right about some things, there's clearly a cognitive unconscious. That's the idea that much of what we think, feel, and do is driven by things that we can't put our fingers on. You could call them implicit, as an implicit memory. That's the cognitive unconscious. So let's explore that a little bit. And try it. I'll let Brett tell you about this a little bit. If you've read your executive summary, you know that we're about to talk about the Stroop effect as an example of the operation of the cognitive unconscious. So what I'd like you to do here is to simply familiarize yourself with the 5 colors, red, green, yellow, blue, and brown, that I've represented here. And the only reason I showed them to you here is that on some screens, the blue might look kind of purple, the brown might look kind of orange. We're going to call these colors red, green, yellow, blue, and brown, as you see them here from left to right. And on the next slide, as soon as that slide appears, and you're going to make it appear if you're taking this online, I'd like you to read that list of colors from top to bottom in order as quickly as you possibly can. All right, I'll advance it for you. Of course, here we go. Top to bottom, I think you're going to see 8 squares. Say those colors to yourself as quickly as you possibly can. Here we go. Red, yellow, green, brown, blue, yellow, green, red. Okay, that was pretty quick. All right, I did it. That was easy. Red, yeah, red, yellow, green, brown, blue, yellow, green, red. Awesome, pretty easy. All right, yeah, that was pretty easy. I'm going to make it a bit more difficult now by showing you not squares, but words printed in red, yellow, green, brown, or blue. Yeah, I almost said ink, but that's not ink. You know, printed in red, yellow, green, brown, or blue. And your job, top to bottom, is to tell me as quickly as you can, I won't speak over you this time, what those colors are. On your mark, get set, I hope. On your mark, get set, go. Go, come on, go. Yeah, that was pretty easy. So blue, red, green, yellow, brown, red, blue, yellow. All right, that was pretty easy. Still, I mean, it was a little distracting because of those truths, that truth you see there in front of you. But yeah, I got it. Let's do it one more time. It might be a little bit more challenging. On your mark, get set, I hope. Go. Go. Come on. Wow, that was much more. I did it mentally, but and I heard about this effect 1,000 times. J. Ridley Stroop discovered it in 1935, and I read about it when I took my first psychology course ever many decades ago. That's called the Stroop effect. And the Stroop effect is the difficulty people have in naming letter colors, whether it's printed on a page or a computer screen, when the letters spell color words that are different than the letter colors. I know that's a mouthful. It almost feels like a tongue twister, but that's as short as I can make the definition of the Stroop effect. The trouble you have in naming letter colors, you make errors, you go more slowly when the letters spell color words that are different than the letter colors. That's the Stroop effect. This effect happens because reading is mainly automatic, and I'm going to assume that you read your executive summary and already knew about the Stroop effect, but I'm guessing that knowing about it did not prevent you from experiencing it, right? Let's see what Brett has to say about this. Notice that in the context of a lecture on consciousness, automatic processes are unconscious. They are things that are happening when you're thinking through a problem or engaging in a complex behavior. When the kind of thinking you're engaging in is fast, unconscious, mandatory, and efficient. I like to summarize that and help my students remember that with the acronym FUME, F-U-M-E, and you will notice, and you'll see it again on the next slide, that the 4 basic properties of automatic thinking, automatic information processing are that automatic processes are fast, F, unconscious, U, mandatory, M, and efficient, E, F-U-M-E. All right. There, I put it in red. Since I guess I didn't say it, let me just briefly mention, since you know what fast is, now you know what unconscious is. Mandatory means you pretty much have to do it, even if you don't want to. Sometimes it happens. And efficient means that you can do that thing, that automatic thing. You can think an automatic thought. If you're a good pianist, you can play the piano while you do something else, or while you think about something else. So automatic processes happen even when other things might be eating up your cognitive energy, because they happen very efficiently. So quick, unconscious, mandatory, and efficient. Controlled processes, by the way, are exactly the opposite of that. So it doesn't, SCOE is not really a word, but if you remember fume, and you remember that controlled processes are the opposite of automatic. They're slow instead of fast, conscious instead of unconscious, for example. And yeah, they're optional. You can stop them. Yes, they're effortful. They're hard work. You will also remember what controlled processes are. They're the opposite of automatic processes. And of course, there are some things that you may have done that you've done a bit, but you're not quite an expert yet, that are somewhere between the two. They're not completely controlled, but they're not fully automatic. All right. Now, as you're going to see throughout this course, anything you think, any judgment you make, and lots of complicated behaviors could be construed as either automatic to you or controlled to you. And I'll quickly zip through a list. I hope you recognize that stereotyping. How well you're beginning to appreciate automatic versus controlled information processing. I'd like you to work your way through this little list here. I've listed 7 different activities or 7 different thoughts. No, I'm going to stop him because I'm going to do it more quickly than he did, unless he starts speaking again. Stereotyping another person, automatic. Unless you have a PhD in math, you're a high school math teacher and you've been teaching calculus for a long time, solving a complicated calculus problem, certainly controlled. If it's an easy one and you're a math expert, it could be automatic, but typically that's controlled. If you like a person, if you engage in what Freud would call transference, that's almost certainly automatic. If you answer an essay question about the brain, unless you've really, really, really studied the brain, that's probably controlled. And if you're trying to drive a truck, a big truck, not a car, with a manual transmission that requires a stick shift in England on the left side of the road, steering is still automatic and the brake is still automatic and the gas is still automatic, but the clutch and the handling the big vehicle and the driving on the other side of the road, those things are going to be controlled, which could get you in trouble. Typing an old password by mistake because you're distracted, automatic. Recognizing what you've done and correcting it with the new password, that would be controlled. Okay, so those are quick examples of that. Now, what I like to do when I get to meet with people face to face is to have them use what they know about automatic processing to mess me up when I try to do something, but I can't do that because I'm not in front of you. I'm going to share with you a video that's built on that activity. I like to be in the classroom bouncing on a rollabola. It looks kind of like that. And I like to get my students to try to knock me off the rollabola by giving me difficult, not automatic things, controlled things to do. And so, for example, if you ask me pretty simple questions in Spanish, that's more likely to knock me off the rollabola than if you ask me to list the exact dates of birth of my 6 siblings, because those are completely automatic to me. If you ask me to define heteroscedasticity, I can do that because I teach, well, at least I used to teach, and I've written a book about statistics, so stats, at least that level of stats, is relatively automatic for me. Counting backwards from 1,000 by, let's say, 17s, that would be much more taxing. I hope I could do it, but I'd really have to think about it carefully. That would be controlled. That would be more likely to knock me off the rollabola. And I'm going to give you the best thing I can to demonstrate that with some help from my daughter, Brooklyn. Just back in March, if you look at my knee there, you can see that scar pretty clearly. I had knee replacement surgery about 3 months before this video was made. So I was still in some pain, but I was able to barely stay up on the Rollabola. And we're going to see what that illustrates, I hope, about automatic and controlled processing. Let's see if I can do that. Okay, I can barely stay up on this Rollabola. We're going to see if I can do a little bit more. Show off. All right. I think it took me 2 tries to do that. It might have been the first try. It didn't take me a long time. I was thrown off base by the fact that the sidewalk was very rough and it's a bit of a hill there. I've only done it before in an indoor setting with a nice smooth floor carpet. That change alone made it more difficult. Having a fake knee, surgically inserted in my knee just a few months before that made it more difficult. But I was still able to have at least some success at that. And the thing that fell apart first was the Rollabola. And for me, staying up on the Rollabola, especially on a sidewalk on a hill when it's kind of rough, that was the least automatic thing. That's not completely automatic. It required a lot of my attention. I'm not a good harmonica player. I only know 2 songs. That's one of them. But I can play it about as well when I'm on the Rollabola as when I'm not, because that song is relatively automatic. Juggling is by far the most automatic of the 3. I do make mistakes when juggling, but for me, juggling is relatively automatic. So the lesson there is if something is automatic, you can often do that thing and do other things at the same time. If it's not, if it's controlled, you have no business trying to do that thing, like study for an exam, when you also try to do something else. All right, I think that's that. Okay, I can barely stay up on this Rollabola. Keep moving here. I already said that, so I'm not going to repeat myself here. Oh, I guess I didn't give you this question though. If you're trying to do 2 or more things at one time, the one that is blank will suffer very badly. If you try to do 2 or more things at once, yeah, which one? I hope it's clear. The one that will get messed up if you're trying to do 2 things at once, one automatic, one controlled. The thing that will get messed up is the controlled thing, not the automatic thing. All right, that's our break. It's been a bit more than 50 minutes. It's a long lecture, but I hope I kept you engaged and interested. And I'm going to stop now and post this one.